problems arise and then you throw money at the problem, more issues that arise, the more you're throwing that contingency out, you probably could have solved it with some earlier planning or thinking. What I love about animation, and I think they have right, and I think we could do it better in live action, is everything is planned to within an inch of its life before you go into production. You've done all the hard work up front. And I think what our superpower has been as producers has been, we know what people need and we know what we're asking of them. So if we know we're about to ask something outrageous, then we know we can mitigate that with an approach that might help.
Welcome to the podcast, Nick Colla.
Thanks for having me.
You're a producer and co-founder at LateNite in Melbourne, working across both live action and animation. What I think is really interesting about LateNite is that you come from an acting background and your co-founder, Chris, comes from a post-production supervisor background. And you've got this blended skill set that combines really incredible storytelling with post-production workflows and efficiencies. So I'd love to dig into your approach and especially how you use technology and workflows to make your shows possible. How did LateNite and your collaboration with Chris come about?
We actually met at uni and we just made a pact to every year while we were working these other jobs, do a creative thing. So whether it be a short film or a music video, we would just learn. So we had a community of people that we worked with. We would do a ton of different jobs. So Chris might record sound. I would be directing, but racing ahead to kind of get the catering set up for lunch. And it was this real kind of post-uni crash test in kind of doing everything just because we wanted to make stuff. We kind of fell into producing. Like it wasn't ever an intention for either of us. I was really hell-bent on writing and directing, and Chris was sort of interested in everything, really, just the filmmaking process. Like, he quite famously had not seen a lot of films that he had seen the behind-the-scenes for, so he would watch the behind-the-scenes rather than watch the actual film. But what it meant that we just had a real practical, creative first, how do we work it out approach. Nothing ever felt too difficult because we always found a workaround, or we were always looking at either A, how we could compromise, or B, how we could find a way that made it achievable, what we actually wanted to do, and then using that kind of knowledge of having been across a number of different fields to execute.
Were you ever working on bigger sets in other roles, or were you primarily just creating your own content?
Primarily creating my own, but I mean, I was an actor for 10, 15 years before I started on this path, and there was a lot of downtime as an actor. And so you spend a lot of time observing, looking at what people do, what their jobs are. So even though kind of practically I wasn't setting up lights or I wasn't working with the sound department or anything like that, I had spent a lot of time since I was a kid looking at how a set functioned and what everyone's jobs and kind of responsibilities were. Realistically, there is no way you could learn everything about how a film set functions or how television is made. But what you can do is you can know enough so that you know what they need. And I think what our superpower has been as producers has been, we know what people need and we know what we're asking of them. So if we know we're about to ask something outrageous, then we know we can mitigate that with an approach that might help. The more we can at least have a broad idea of what the department needs, what they do, how they function, and how they work as part of the kind of big machine that is a film or television production, you can just be more empathetic. And I think you can approach things in a different way, that even if you can't do exactly what you want, you can find a way of doing it that might not be exactly right, but it might at least be a nice compromise that's not going to send everybody mad.
Speaking of the enormity of production, one of your early projects is The Wizards of Oz for SBS. Tell us a bit about that project, because I know that you achieved far beyond what most people would expect.
The Wizards of Oz is about a wizard called Jack that gets frustrated with all the warring that goes on in his fantasy realm, so he migrates to the western suburbs of Melbourne, and all of these magical creatures start to follow him. So Wizards came about because we started working with Michael Shanks, who is now obviously just had his film Together released. Michael was just this incredible talent that we met when he was, I think, maybe like 18 or 19. Michael was the first time Chris and I really leaned into producing for anyone other than ourselves. Our approach really early on was always like, go away and write it and then we'll work it out. The beauty of Wizards was there was kind of a naivety about us in terms of what we were actually taking on. And the creative was so good and so fun that everybody that we got on board, who were all incredibly good at their jobs, just very like exceptionally talented people that knew what they were signing up for. And we made it very clear what it was and what we wanted to do. It was an intense shoot for a lot of reasons, but it was really fun. And the beautiful thing about having someone like Michael direct a show like that, which had over 1,200 visual effects shots, is he knew exactly what he wanted and he knew exactly what we needed to achieve to set him up and Chris up for success, because Chris and Michael did the entire post themselves. And so having somebody like that present, which I think is so important when it comes to visual effects, you can have a relatively straightforward post period because the person that is driving the show is the one in that example that's going to be implementing the visual effects in post. So of course, he's going to do things that are going to make his life so much easier later on. So a lot of the time it was working out a practical solution that could be complemented by visual effects rather than doing a full visual effects build. And I think it actually made the show better. And it's something that we've been really passionate about all the way through making our stuff, is having that practical element that you could complement rather than just doing a solve it in post with visual effects. We shot a unit for Lingo on Lambs of God, uh, and we were shooting these fairy tale sequences, one of which was a snow set, like a big snow set. We were kind of on the back end of production, so money was tight. And there was like a real concern how we were going to work this out, because I think the original idea was they were going to try and shoot it on location. But what we pulled together, which I think is really effective, was just looking at how we could, again, have practical elements that we could build. And it was working with a production design team. We decided to use a backdrop and then kind of cover the foreground in as many practical elements as we could. So like fake snow and trees and like using kind of like weirdly old Hollywood techniques um, to build something that otherwise was going to be really, really difficult to do. So how do we take kind of like all those elements and find a way to achieve it without it letting it get the better of us, I guess. Chris and I are very hands-on. We really, really want to be involved. And that's because of our background. Like I have absolutely no issue packing up a C stand and helping to pack a truck if it means we're going to get out of a location quicker. To be honest with you, I think it is a lot of producers of our generation that have come up through having to DIY. We've never had any money. And so subsequently we've had to find a way around it. So when you're on those kind of bigger shows and time is a real pressure, it means I can be part of the solution rather than part of the problem.
I want to touch on the Freestyle Manifesto because LateNite made a contribution to that document that Julie produced in collaboration with Dr. Austin Hayden. A couple of quotes. Every decision you make in pre-production dramatically affects post-production. Do you want to talk about that to start with?
Chris says something which I really liked, which was the best way to produce something is to get everybody on the same page early on. And also to work out where you want to fight your battles. It's going to be so much easier to fight a battle in pre than it is in production. So as much information as you can gather, and that includes like things in post production that might come up, whether that be visual effects, like having a visual effects person involved really early on, but also something as simple as like having a colorist work with you in pre and work with the DP to potentially set the look of the show. Are there ways that we can get people involved earlier on? Are there things that we can do, like looking at animatics, looking at how we board, particularly with like technology coming through? Again, trying to fight as many of those battles in pre or even in development, trying to solve those problems earlier rather than later.
How early are you bringing particular people into that development or pre-production process?
I think somebody at Future Vision a couple of years ago called it the triangle of sadness. The producer, setup, director, and writer, or creator of the show. I'm a big advocate for that as a team. So bringing in a director early, I quite like in the development process. Yeah, honestly, the The answer is always the earlier the better. CJ Dobson at Mood Labs is doing some really interesting stuff with getting colorists engaged earlier in the process to work with DPs to, again, set the look for the show so that it has a positive knock-on effect for when she gets into her role in grading the show or the film at the end. Not uncommon in the US, but people look at it as a cost here or as a bump on traditional workflows or pipelines. But what a great idea. Like, why wouldn't you? It's cost up front, but it's going to save you money in the back end. It just comes back to efficiencies, right? If we can get people in early to make decisions earlier, then we absolutely will.
I think people often forget about that cost on the back end, where the more people you have in a room making decisions and trying to fix things when you're in the color grading facility, that adds on cost at the end of the day. You have your main colorist come in pre, you set that look, it gets approved, that decision's made, and then you can obviously make tweaks down the track, but it's not starting from scratch and trying to come up with a look for the show right there and then.
Exactly. I honestly do think that we do waste a lot of money. Like, we do burn a lot of money because what happens is problems arise and then you throw money at the problem. The more money you throw at something and the more issues that arise, the more you're throwing that contingency out to try and solve a problem. You probably could have solved it with some earlier planning or thinking.
One other thing I would love to talk to you about that was in the Freestyle Manifesto is Chris's statement that he's a big opponent of slates and clapperboards. They're redundant technology that's not needed, wastes time, and the first thing that any assistant editor does is delete the slate when they're reviewing footage. What?
I am not going to sit here and defend Chris about clapperboards. I think Chris is like, he's worked on set as a sound recordist, he's worked in the lighting department, and he's worked as an editor. And I think looking at all of those things, Chris's reasoning is that, like, I don't use them. So why waste time? Just get into the shot. We're not going to use it anyway. It's the same. He's got a thing with like booms dipping into shot and like somebody calling cut when the boom's in, because he was like, that's such an easy thing for me to take out. I'd rather have the good audio and like save that time, particularly if you're up against it, than be worried about a tiny little bit of like boom sock hanging into the frame. So I think it's just a personal preference. To be honest, I don't think clappers are going anywhere.
I do love that it's a question that he's asking, though, because, if they're not needed anymore, if you can just sync time code and get what you need in post-production, then it's interesting that nobody has stopped to question that.
I do think there are a lot of those things littered into how we work that we do because we've always done, not because it's necessarily the best way. So I think that's at the heart of everything with us, is just to like question how we work and not necessarily fall into a pattern. Because, as everybody knows, like, no two productions are the same. One of the interesting things, takeaways I had from Future Vision this year was there was a panel with Emil Sherman, Kim Williams, and Rachel Perkins, and they were talking about budget constraints, I think. And Rachel, who I'm obsessed with, said, I would rather have a smaller crew and more time than a bigger crew and less time. And I think there's something in that.
I also know that on some of your productions, especially from a post perspective, you're not necessarily following that traditional pathway of picture lock and then moving on to VFX sound. Other departments, you keep that workflow open so that changes can be made as you go. That, again, is something that on the surface feels like it could just blow out costs if everything can just keep going forever.
It's tricky in the context of how we work, because so much, particularly the smaller projects that we've done, so much of what we do so much of it in-house. We do what works for us, which is remain flexible. In a traditional post house, it's a lot harder to do. I worked on a show last year with another company who were always worried about, their concern was always, what if a problem happens when we wanted to change something? So they were never that keen on trying something because of the potential for it to go wrong. Obviously, you don't want to try something new in the middle of production that backfire on you. So I get the fear of it. But like, what I wish there was a little bit more of was flexibility, because it does allow you to make something better and to focus on, again, what I think is important, which is the story, right?
I love this because on one hand, we're talking about planning, which implies control and having everything in a structured box. But on the other hand, we're talking about flexibility and creativity and figuring things out on set. And I think there's a real balance between the two. It's almost like the planning allows for the creative flexibility once you get to that stage.
I think so. Like, it's no surprise to me that Danny and Michael Philippou and Michael Shanks have made the films that they have. And hearing the stories from on set of both Talk to Me and Together, achieving stuff on a budget that is really low for what they're making. It's because they're flexible. It's because they've done it. They've done it for years and years and years, playing their craft. We went through a period when we first started shooting these insane music videos where we had no money. It was erratic. It was chaotic. We had to plan for the worst case scenarios because of what we were doing. I do think it just comes down to flexibility, knowing as much as you can and arming yourself with as much knowledge as you can and leaning on people who are experts in their field. And then if you do need to change something, just taking a minute to consider, is there another way to do this that doesn't make the end product suffer? We have incredible visual effects companies in this country, but I have seen stuff over the years with some truly terrible visual effects on some big funded shows. And so when you look at that and you look at what we did with Wizards and you're like, well, we can do it on nothing with a couple of people in Michael Shanks's mum's basement. How has this gone to air with visual effects that are this terrible? And they're often shots that could have been solved with better planning, having a visual effects person on set, or looking at it more practically because the approach was kind of evidently wrong.
So, a lot of your recent work has been in the animation space. I'd love to dig into that and what lessons you've taken from live action into animation or vice versa.
I love animation. It's very new for us. We made a short with Michael called Rebooted, which went to Annecy. That was a stop motion short, stop motion lead character in a live action setting with 2D, 3D, and puppet characters. So not only were we doing a fully stop motion animated lead, we also had to match lighting from our live action plates into our shooting our stop motion lead on green. So it was very highly complicated, very data driven short. And then we moved into 2D, and we've been working primarily in 2D for the last couple of years. And what I love about animation, and I think they have right, and I think we could do it better in live action, is exactly what I've just been talking about. Everything is planned to within an inch of its life before you go into production. So you'll produce an animatic, and that animatic will get tweaked, and once that's locked, that's locked. And the best part about animatics is this so much cheaper, obviously, to produce than the animation itself. So you can tweak it as much as you like. So if you go into a scratch track to start with, and then you get your performers in the booth and they have something different to offer, or there's a performance beat that feels different, or you can tweak that script while you're working in the animatic. You can tweak it. Subsequently, you are going into production with an exceptional blueprint of what the show is, where the jokes are landing, how the story is working. So once you get to production, it's really like it's weirdly about performance because you've done all the hard work up front. I would love to be able to do that in live action. The argument probably is it's not cost effective. There are people doing some really interesting stuff in the space. The Last Pixel guys used virtual production to do storyboarding for I Am Mother, so VR storyboarding. They did a little video that kind of outlays the process. It's really excellent and really clever. The idea at the heart of it is great. Like, how do we go into production with like a really strong blueprint? And, just like in animation, things do change. There is a retakes team. Like, sometimes you will have to redo shots, but for the most part, before you step on set, before you go into production on your animation, that it's working, that it's funny, the story is clear. So you kind of can't fail in a way. Like, you're putting yourself in the best position to succeed anyway. So that's definitely something that we're looking at, how we can have more of kind of an animatic workflow that's cost effective in pre-production, looking at using that sort of storyboarding technology to give directors a bit more time in pre to help them be better prepared when going into production. They can see the limitations of sets, for example, or potentially the limitations of locations. You know, scanning of locations is not overly difficult, particularly exterior locations. Like I think on I Am Mother, they pulled a lot of like GPS data. So they had kind of an accurate layout of a beach they were using in New Zealand. So I'm interested in that stuff. Like, how can we be more prepared to go into production? How can we solve all those problems in pre or most of, so that the focus at the end of the day is telling the story in the best way we can. And the beautiful thing about some of the stuff that the guys did on I Am Mother is you can look at your lighting, you can have the lighting team involved in that conversation. In the virtual kind of set, Grant, the director, was carrying around like a lens accurate camera. So he was framing up shots. So you just think about all of the time that would solve, knowing what we're going into.
So they're taking those scans, inputting them into a digital format, and then they're able to add their lighting plans, look at shots with the actual lens sizes that they're using. They essentially have a virtual environment or a digital environment that they can pre-plan their entire shoot before they even step onto the set.
Yeah, arguably. So it's a really specific case because it's really one location, one set build. As far as I know, the guys kind of built the set really early on from like the back of a napkin sketch of what they wanted it to be. And then yeah, Grant basically would go in and put the VR headset on and carry a camera around the set, and they had virtual models of the characters as well. So they would pop the virtual characters in spot, take the shot, and you could bring up the stills, you could have the script on screen. It's a really remarkable tool. This isn't anything really new. Like, this gets used on things like The Mandalorian and like big budget productions. What's more interesting to me is the cost effective version. How do we take technology used by something like Disney on some of their bigger shows, and how can we adapt that? Technology is rapidly changing. So how do we get on the front foot and work out how to use that technology to our benefit to make everybody's lives A, easier, but B, more cost effective for all of us?
Because the reality is the most expensive part of any shoot is production, when you have 60, 100, 150 people on set all waiting around where every minute counts. And if you have that planning done early up front, when there's only potentially a director or your triangle of sadness working on it with a couple of key HODs, that's a huge cost saving.
Totally. And like, it's not to say stuff won't go wrong or stuff won't be quite right. Like, of course it will. But the idea is to give yourself a jumping off point.
What do you think is holding people back from taking this kind of approach now? Is it that they don't understand or know how to use the technology? Is it a budgetary concern?
I don't know. Like, honestly, I don't know how many people know it exists. I don't know how many people are curious enough to look into it. We're always looking to do things better and to learn from each production. Sometimes when you get in that cycle of making 1, 2, 3 shows a year, far more experienced producers than I know how to do this back to front. They've been doing it for a long time. Why fix what's not broken, perhaps? Whereas I come up from the other direction, which is like, I want to find ways to do the stuff that I want to do. And often the stuff that we want to do is quite big and complicated. So how can we do that without making a poorer product, I guess?
And especially when you see a lot of people writing to what's possible in production, it's kind of refreshing to go, okay, let's write whatever we want to make and then figure out how to do it.
Yeah, it's the best, because why wouldn't you do that? Is that not, is that nuts? I want to be in a world where we like write the outlandish stuff and, you know, have somebody read it and go like, oh, I really want to make this. Somebody get really excited. I'm so glad Talk to Me and Together exists, not only for us as an industry, but because somebody stumped up money for these 3 insane creatives to make the film of their dreams, and they had the support to do that. And the proof is in the pudding. Like, they made globally successful films, which is very unusual for Australia. So how great to be in a position where we can do that, where we can read somebody's highly complex, off the wall script and go, let's do it. I'd much rather us be taking that approach than being like, what's producible?
It's almost sad that we have accepted what is producible as the standard.
I know. I know. Anyway, I do think it's heading more in that direction. this year I've seen more Australian films at the cinema than I ever have because I've wanted to, not because I felt like I had to, which I think there is a big difference. Like, I want us as Australians to watch stuff because we want to watch stuff and we're excited to watch stuff. This year, between Together, Bring Her Back, Lesbian Space Princess, Went Up the Hill, We Bury the Dead, there's some exceptional films being made, really interesting and all so different.
We always finish our episodes asking our guests for an idea or suggestion that they think could change the future of our screen industry for the better. So, do you have a pitch for us?
I do. It might be an unpopular one, maybe popular in some ways and unpopular in others. I'd love us to fix development. I think we do a terrible job of developing shows in this country, and a lot of it comes down to money. But it's really interesting at a time where there are a lot of writers out of the work at the moment. There's not a lot getting made. And yet, and this is the part that's going to make me unpopular, like, rates for development are obviously like really high. It's really hard to have a meaningful development period because it's just so cost prohibitive. And what happens is every year at like Screen Forever or Future Vision, we have these panels where an American showrunner comes out and talks about their 12-week rooms, and we all titter and laugh and go, oh, couldn't do it in this country. But nobody's ever asked, like, well, can we look at how we develop then? Sure, maybe we can't do 12 or 20 weeks, but is there a compromise? Can we look at rates, for example? Like, is there a benefit to having like slightly lower rates but longer rooms? I get why they're high. I understand that. But equally, can we employ somebody for 8 weeks rather than a week? More people are employed. More people are being able to learn and come through. That's more opportunities for note takers. I feel like there are so many positives. Obviously, the negative, it looks like we're taking away money. But like, my big thing is, I don't think we have enough respect for writers in this country. So having writers more at the forefront of shows, having them much more involved. You can't develop a show in a week. You can't. You cannot brainstorm for 3 days and plot a series outline in 2 days and expect it's going to be any good. You just can't. I think it's impossible. We put an impossible task on our writers, and it's a miracle that anything good comes out the other side of it. Yeah, that's my big thing. And I'm sorry I said to take away money. I didn't mean it the way it probably sounds.
I think it's worth the conversation, though, because the reality is, like you say, it is impossible to develop shows in that short amount of time in the room. So the writers are off doing that extra work anyway. They're getting paid the high day rates, but then they're spending additional weeks in the background because they care about the quality of the show and they want the time to be able to do it well. So maybe just having that upfront conversation and going, hey, we acknowledge and respect that this is actually going to take you 10 weeks.
I've heard people in the last 12 months, when things have gotten hard, being asked to do free drafts. I'm not suggesting that. I'm want to try and mitigate that. I'd at the very least, love to hear the arguments for and against, because I think it would be a really interesting conversation to have.
Thank you so much, Nick. It's been amazing to talk to you today. Thanks for being on the podcast.
We Interrupt This broadcast is recorded on the unceded lands of the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation and the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains, and we acknowledge them as the traditional custodians and first storytellers of these regions. Always was, always will be.